He thought it was just another stormy night, until two giant Apache sisters appeared at his barn, pleading for shelter. By sunrise, 300 warriors had encircled his land, their intent clear: vengeance. One act of kindness had unleashed a tide of unstoppable danger. The wind came first low and crawling, carrying the dry taste of thunder. Then the sky split open. Across the dying plains of Dry Creek, clouds rolled heavy like bruises over bone. Mercer stood in the doorway of his barn, hat pulled low, eyes narrow against the grit. The storm was coming fast, the kind that didn't bring rain, only dust, noise, and ruin. He could smell it before he saw it, that strange, burning scent of lightning over dirt. His land lay stretched and cracked before him, 40 acres of what used to be promise. Now it was nothing but ghosts and stubble. The last of his cattle stumbled near the fence, ribs sharp as fence wire, eyes lost, and beyond them the horizon trembled under a curtain of red dust. He stepped into the yard, boots sinking into thirsty soil. Each step felt heavier than the last, like the ground itself was asking him to turn back. But Mercer didn't turn back. Not since the day he buried his wife under the white oak. He whistled low, a sound that barely carried through the wind. "Come on, Daisy," he muttered, "not tonight, not in this damn storm." His last calf was tangled near the ravine, bleating weakly. He'd already lost 3 this month. He wasn't about to lose the 4th. The wind screamed, the dust lifted. Somewhere far off, thunder rolled like a drum of war. The storm tore across the plains with claws of light, eating the horizon in great, glowing bites. He tied a rag across his face and moved forward, fighting the wind that pushed him back. Every few feet, the earth cracked underfoot hollow, starved of water. The sky spat the first drops, thick, brown, useless, and then, for a moment, there was silence. The kind of silence that makes a man believe the world just stopped breathing. He found the calf half, buried in mud and straw, one leg twisted, crying softly. "Easy now," he whispered. His hands, rough as bark, slid under its belly. He heaved, the sound of pain breaking in his throat. The calf struggled, then went limp in his arms, exhausted. Lightning tore through the sky, revealing the land in flashes: the barn, the oak tree, the field of dying wheat, and something else. 2 shapes near the ridge. Human, moving slow, then collapsing. Froze. The storm lit the ridge again, just long enough for him to see the truth. They weren't men, they were women. One tall, one even taller, both bare, armed, smeared with dust and blood. Even from a distance, he saw the shimmer of beads and feathers torn by the wind. Apache. His heart stuttered. He looked back toward the barn, then toward the bodies lying still on the ridge. Every voice in his head told him to stay out of it. He'd seen what happened to men who helped their kind. The cavalry didn't ask questions. They just burned, buried, and moved on. But there was something about the way the taller one fell, slow, deliberate, like a tree giving up after a long fight. Something in that surrender pulled him forward. He laid the calf inside the fence and turned toward the ridge. The wind howled harder now, tearing the breath from his chest. Lightning flashed again, the kind that left ghosts on a man's eyes. He climbed the slope, each step sinking in mud and memory. When he reached them, he knelt. The older sister's skin was cold, her arms slashed open from shoulder to wrist. The younger one still breathed shallow, frightened. Her eyes opened for half a heartbeat, and in that moment, Illy saw something he hadn't seen in years. Not fear, not hate, just pleading. A human asking another to keep the world from ending, if only for one night. Thunder cracked. He looked back toward the barn, the open door flapping in the wind like a flag of surrender. Then he looked at the women, and for the first time in a long time, Mercer made a choice that could kill him. He slipped his arms under the heavier one. Her weight was near impossible strong, built like she'd carried half her tribe across the desert. He grunted, stumbled, and dragged her down the hill, boots cutting trenches in the mud. The younger one tried to crawl after them, but her leg gave out. He turned, grabbed her by the waist, and pulled her 2 one dragging step at a time. By the time he reached the barn, his arms burned, his breath was fire. He kicked the door open. fell to his knees and laid them down in the straw. The storm slammed into the barn like a beast dust, rain and thunder breaking through every crack. Illy shut the door, bolted it, and leaned his head against the wood. Outside, the world roared. Inside, it was only the sound of their breathing, ragged, weak but alive. He looked down at them, faces ghostly in the flicker of lightning through the boards. He knew what they were. He knew what it meant, and still he whispered half to them, half to himself, "Reckon the Lord don't send souls to your door for nothing." The thunder answered him, and the storm carried on. The barn creaked like an old ship in a restless sea. Rain found its way through every crack, falling in thin silver lines across the straw. Illy Mercer knelt between the two women, a lantern trembling in his hand, throwing gold light over blood and dirt. The older one, the tall one, had a wound deep across her shoulder, the kind that said someone wanted her dead, but missed the heart by inches. He tore a strip from his own shirt, pressing it hard against the gash. Blood soaked through fast, too fast. "Hold, damn you," he whispered. "Don't you give in on me now." The younger woman stirred beside her sister, breath shallow, eyes wild and dark. She muttered words he didn't know, soft and desperate, like prayers whispered through fever. Her hands clutched the dirt, as though trying to hang on to life itself. He poured water from a bucket, washed their faces clean of dust. The older one's skin was fever hot, muscles trembling even in unconsciousness. Illy's fingers brushed the edge of a beaded necklace around her throat, black stone, carved with a symbol he'd never seen. It felt old, older than any war or treaty, older than any name he knew. He pulled the blanket from his cot and covered them both. The lantern hissed as the wind pushed through the cracks. He sat back, breathing heavy, staring at what he'd done. Out there in the dark, the law would call it treason. Helping wounded Apaches meant death. But in here, in this trembling barn filled with rain and ghosts, none of that mattered. Illy leaned his head back against the wall. For a moment, he let the storm speak. It beat against the roof in rhythm like 1,000 boots marching, like memories coming to life. He remembered another night like this one, the fire, the screaming, the white oak burning as soldiers rode through his land chasing shadows that looked like these women. He'd held his wife that night, her hands shaking, her voice breaking. She'd said, "Mercy, Illy. Even when the world forgets what it means, don't." Her voice was gone now, but her words stayed, heavy as a bullet in his chest. He stood, checked the latch on the door again. The horizon outside flashed white, and for a heartbeat he saw movement far off beyond the ridge. Riders, maybe 4, maybe 5, maybe soldiers, he couldn't tell. He doused the lantern. Darkness swallowed the barn whole. The storm roared louder, masking every sound but the pounding of his heart. He crossed the floor, boots silent on the straw, and reached for his rifle. It leaned against the post, still clean, still oiled, though it hadn't fired a shot in 3 years. He checked the chamber, loaded it slow. His hands knew the motion better than his mind did. Thunder rolled again, closer this time. The wind howled through the hills like something alive. He crouched near the door, peering through the gaps in the boards. Nothing but rain, nothing but shadows, still he felt them out there, the kind of feeling that crawls along the spine, old instinct warning a man that death is watching. Behind him, the younger sister coughed sharp and wet. He turned, her eyes were open now, dark as obsidian, glinting in the half-light. She looked at him, not with fear, but confusion. He raised a hand slowly, a peace gesture, silent and careful. She didn't move. Her lips parted. A single word came out, "Sijiai." He didn't know what it meant, but the sound of it broken, trembling, hit something deep inside him. He moved closer, whispering softly, "You're safe now," even though he wasn't sure if that was true. The woman's gaze drifted to her sister, then back to him, a weak nod, a shiver. Then she closed her eyes again. He sat there for a long while, listening to the storm drag its anger across the plains. Each thunderclap felt like a heartbeat of the earth. Each flash of lightning showed him his choices and how few remained. He looked at the rifle in his lap, at the women lying in his straw, at the door shaking under the force of the wind. And he knew before morning someone would come. Whether it was soldiers or death itself, he couldn't tell, But he also knew this. He'd already crossed the line. A man can't drag two wounded souls out of a storm and then pretend his hands are clean. He leaned back, set the rifle across his knees, and spoke low to the darkness. All right then, let it come. The storm answered, splitting the sky in two. And through that blinding light, the ranch of Mercer stood like a scar on the land. One man, two strangers, and a promise that tomorrow would bring blood. Morning crawled in slow and gray. No birds. No breeze. Just the echo of the storm dying somewhere over the far hills. Ashwood Ranch lay quiet, too quiet, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Mercer hadn't slept. He sat against the barn post, hat tilted low, rifle still resting across his knees. His eyes were red, but not from the dust from memory, the kind that didn't fade when dawn came. The lantern had burned out hours ago. Now, pale light bled through the cracks in the boards, turning the air gold and cold at once. He could see them clearer now, the two women lying on the straw, their faces soft in the morning hush, but their bodies bore the story of violence, cuts along their arms, bruises spreading dark and deep. Fighters, survivors. He rose stiffly, poured the last of his water into a bowl, and dampened a rag. The younger one stirred first. When he touched her forehead, she flinched, eyes snapping open, sharp as blades. Her hand darted up, gripping his wrist with strength that startled him, but her voice was just a breath. No, soldiers. Her English was broken, thick with desert and smoke. Illy shook his head slow. No soldiers here. She watched him, not trusting yet, but seeing something in his face that wasn't threat. Her hand loosened. He felt her pulse under his thumb, fast, frightened, alive. The older sister still hadn't moved. Her breathing was shallow, her skin cold where fever hadn't touched. He checked the wound, cloth dark with dried blood, but holding. He'd done what he could. The rest was up to whatever mercy the earth still had left. Illy stood, pushed the door open just enough to look outside. The yard was wrecked, fence down, one post still smoldering from lightning. The field looked like something dragged claws through it. And beyond the ridge, thin trails of smoke still rose into the morning sky. Soldiers' campfires. He shut the door again. A chill ran through him, not from cold, but from the knowledge that this peace was a lie. They'd come this way soon, looking for what they lost, and when they found it, they'd hang the man who hid it. He turned back toward the women. The younger one was sitting up now, one arm wrapped protectively around her sister. Her eyes followed his every move. He moved slow, showing his hands. "You hungry?" he asked softly. She didn't understand the words, but she caught the tone. He tore a piece of bread, laid it near her. She didn't take it at first. Then, when her stomach betrayed her with a quiet growl, she reached forward, hesitant, grateful. The sound of her chewing filled the silence between them, humble and human. Illy watched her, remembering how long it had been since he'd shared a meal with anyone. Not since before the fever took his wife and left the house hollow. His eyes drifted toward the rafters. Dust hung there in the morning light, spinning lazy circles like ghosts dancing to no music. He could almost hear her voice again, his wife, Sarah, calling from the porch, laughing at his stubbornness, telling him the world wasn't all bad yet. He closed his eyes a moment, then opened them to the present. Two strangers bleeding in his barn, a world ready to judge him for it. The younger one spoke again, slow, testing the words. "You. Help," he nodded. Her eyes softened. Why? He didn't answer right away, because he didn't have one. Because saying mercy out loud felt too small for the weight of what he'd done. Finally, he murmured, because somebody should have helped her when she needed it. The woman looked at him, didn't understand the words, but understood the ache in them. She touched her sister's face gently and whispered something in her own tongue. Illy didn't ask what it meant. Some words weren't meant for translation. He pushed the door open again, stepping into the yard. The air was thick with the smell of wet dust and burned wood. The sun climbed weakly through the haze, glinting off the empty troughs and broken fence rails. His world, small and dying, felt even smaller now, like a stage waiting for an ending it didn't want. He turned back toward the barn just as a sound cut through the quiet, the faint, rhythmic clatter of hooves on dry stone. Far off, but coming closer. Illy's jaw tightened. He knew that sound too well. He looked once more at the two women lying in his barn, one half conscious, one half trusting. Then he whispered, "Lord, you better have a plan, 'cause I'm runnin' out of my own." And the morning kept coming, slow and merciless, carrying with it the echo of hooves and the ghosts of Ashwood Ranch waiting to rise again. The sound grew louder, steel striking stone, hooves beating rhythm into the earth. Illy froze in the doorway, rifle hanging at his side, eyes scanning the ridge. 5 riders came into view, shadows against the pale morning. Blue coats, glint of rifles, the glimmer of brass buttons catching sunlight. "Soldiers!" He shut the barn door slow, careful not to make a sound. Inside, the air turned heavy. The younger woman sensed it, her head lifted, eyes narrowing. She knew that sound too. Illy pressed a finger to his lips. She nodded once, silent, alert. He crossed the barn and pulled loose straw over the women, layer by layer, until their faces were hidden. Only the faint rise and fall of their breathing showed they were still alive. He checked the rifle, 1 in the chamber, 5 in the tube, then laid it against the wall. He couldn't use it unless he wanted to die right there, and death wouldn't help anyone now. Boots crunched outside. A man's voice called out, sharp, cold, commanding. "Anyone home?" Illy swallowed hard, wiped his hands on his trousers, and stepped out into the open. The morning glare hit his eyes. The soldiers' horses circled like vultures. The lead rider, a young lieutenant with a narrow face and polished boots, eyed him with suspicion. "You Illy Mercer?" Illy nodded once. "Used to be." The officer smirked. "Still are, far as I'm told. We're tracking fugitives. 2 Apache women, big ones, dangerous. They came through this way last night." He leaned forward in the saddle. "You see anything?" Illy's throat went dry. The air felt too thin to breathe. He shifted his weight, spat into the dirt. "Only saw the storm," he said. "Tore half my fence clean off. Didn't see no people." The officer studied him, face unreadable. Another soldier dismounted, scanning the yard, eyes on the barn, the broken fence, the tracks in the mud. Illy's pulse quickened. He'd dragged those women through that very mud. The marks were still there. The officer caught it too. He nodded toward the prints. "Those yours?" Illy looked down, jaw tight. "Mine and my calf's. Had to pull the poor thing out of the ditch before it drowned in the muck." He forced a small laugh. "Seems like I'm the only fool still tryin' to save what's already gone." The officer's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. He didn't believe him, not fully, but he didn't have proof either. The soldier at the barn door lifted the latch. Illy's voice cut through the air, steady but low. "Don't open that. Got a sick horse in there. Storm near scared it to death. He'll kick your head clean off." The soldier hesitated. The lieutenant's gaze flicked between them, a long moment of silence heavy as judgment. Then he sighed. "Fine, we'll move on. But if we find out you're hiding savages here, Mercer, you'll hang from that tree before sundown." Illy nodded, jaw tight. "Then you best hope you're wrong, Lieutenant." The riders turned their horses, dust rising behind them as they moved down the road. The echo of hooves faded slow, swallowed by the quiet. Illy stood there until the last sound was gone. Only then did he let the breath out of his lungs. He turned back to the barn, pushed the door open, and stepped inside. The younger woman was already sitting up. Her eyes, sharp, glistening, were fixed on him. She'd understood enough. She knew he'd lied for them. He knelt beside her, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Reckon that's the first lie I've told worth telling." She reached out, hand trembling, and touched his arm. Not a thank you in words, something quieter, older, a promise. He looked at the older sister, still unconscious, but breathing steady now. The fever was breaking. Her chest rose and fell like the calm after a long battle. Illy stood, staring down at the two of them, the weight of what he'd done pressing deep into his chest. Outside, the wind was dying, and the sun was crawling higher. Somewhere out on that plain, those soldiers were riding toward something meaner than truth, a reckoning none of them understood. He looked at the faint light spilling through the boards, painting gold lines across the straw. Ghosts of dust floated through it, shimmering like souls too stubborn to leave. He whispered, almost to himself, "Guess you ain't the only ones hunted by the past." And the silence that followed carried his words away, out through the cracks of the barn, over the dying fields of Ashwood Ranch, where mercy had just put down its roots in a land that had long forgotten what mercy meant. The sun crawled up from behind the dry hills, spilling pale light over the ranch. Ashwood lay quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that carries both peace and warning. Illy stood at the well, filling a bucket, his face hollowed by sleepless hours. The echoes of hooves from the day before still haunted his ears. He'd lied to the soldiers, hidden fugitives, and for what? His conscience whispered one answer because it was right. But right didn't always mean safe. Behind him, the barn door creaked open. The younger Apache woman stepped out, her hair unbraided now, wind tossed and wild against her shoulders. She moved with a strange blend of strength and pain, every step careful, deliberate. Illy turned to her, nodding toward the bucket. "Water's clean. You can drink." She didn't answer, only stared at him for a long moment before taking the pail in both hands. Her wrists bore faint rope burns, reminders of whoever had bound her before she reached this place. She lifted the bucket, drank, then splashed the rest over her face. Illy watched quietly, uneasy. He didn't know her name, her story, or the reason an army wanted her dead. All he knew was that she wasn't the monster they claimed. No monster weeps in her sleep. He finally spoke, voice low. "Your sister's still breathin' steady. Fever's going down. She'll live if we keep her warm." The woman looked up, eyes glinting like black glass under the morning light. She placed a hand over her chest. "Nolly," she said softly. Illy frowned that her name. She nodded. Then, after a pause, pointed at herself. "Kaima." Illy repeated it, slow and careful. "Kai, Ma." A faint smile ghosted across her face. It was the first time he'd seen her smile, a brief, human thing in a world full of cruelty. Illy leaned against the fence post, staring out across the land. "I don't figure you're safe here for long," he said. "They'll be back. Soldiers don't take kindly to being lied to." Kaima didn't seem to understand every word, but she caught the tone. Her eyes followed his hand as he pointed toward the far ridge. She shook her head slowly. "Many men come," she said, struggling with the words, "bad men." Illy's jaw tightened. "How many?" She lifted her hand and spread her fingers wide, then did it again. 10, maybe more," he cursed under his breath. That meant a hunting party, maybe the same 300 she'd whispered about last night when half conscious. A war band, furious and lost, looking for their kin. He looked back toward the barn, where Nolly lay hidden in the shadows. If the army found out they'd survived, they'd ride through Ashwood again, and next time, they wouldn't just ask questions. The wind picked up, scattering dry dust across the yard. Illy's old hat nearly blew off as he caught it, eyes scanning the horizon. He could almost feel the land holding its breath. Kaima stepped closer. She looked at the barn, then at him, and pressed her palm flat against her heart. Then she said one word, slow, clear, heavy with meaning. "Promise." Illy hesitated. He wasn't sure if she meant for him to protect them or not to betray them. But either way, it was already too late. The promise was made the moment he hid them. He nodded once. "Reckon I already did." A hawk screamed above, cutting through the still air, and somewhere far out in the canyons beyond the ridge, another sound answered, the faint, distant echo of war drums. Illy's face hardened. He turned toward the barn, voice low and steady. "Then we better get ready, because the storm that was coming this time wasn't made of wind and rain. It was made of men, vengeance, and blood, and it was heading straight for Ashwood Ranch." The sun burned hotter now, hanging above the plains like an angry eye. Illy moved through the yard, every motion heavy with purpose. He checked the rifle, tightened the barn doors, and scattered hay to cover the tracks leading inside. Sweat rolled down his temples, but he didn't stop. Every sound from the distance made his heart flinch. Kaima watched him from the barn doorway, silent eyes following every move. Her sister Nali was sitting up now, weak but awake. Her skin glistened with fever's remnants, yet her gaze carried power, the kind that belonged to leaders and survivors. Illy stepped inside and nodded at her. "Morning, miss. You're tougher than most I've met." Nali didn't answer, her eyes fixed on him, measuring, judging. Then she spoke softly in Apache, words Kaima translated as best she could. She says, "You risked life for strangers." Illy gave a small, rough laugh. "Didn't figure you two were strangers anymore." Kaima spoke quickly to her sister again. Nali's face softened, but only slightly. Then she pointed to the east, the horizon where the canyon began. "Many come," Kaima said quietly. "They look for us, for me." Illy frowned. "Army?" Kaima shook her head. "Apache, warriors, big chief's men, think we dead. Now they hunt white man who take us." Illy froze. That meant two storms coming, the soldiers from one side, the warriors from the other, and he stood right in the middle, holding both ends of the fuse. He set down the rifle and rubbed his tired eyes. "Well," he said finally, "seems I've got myself tangled in a fight that ain't mine." Kaima stepped closer, her tone calm, almost pleading. "You help, we go. Far." She pointed toward the mountains. "Sunset side, safe there." Illy shook his head slowly. "You won't make it alone, and I can't walk away from this ranch. It's all I've got left." Nali whispered something low, her voice steady despite her weakness. Kaima translated, her eyes fixed on him. She says, "Home is not wood and dirt. Home is where mercy live." Illy stood silent. Those words struck deeper than any bullet could. He looked around the barn, the fences, the dry fields. Mercy hadn't lived here in a long time. Maybe it was time it did. Outside, the wind shifted. A low, rhythmic pulse carried across the plains. Thump, 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 drums, faint but growing. Kaima turned sharply toward the sound. Nali reached for the wall to steady herself. Illy grabbed the rifle, heart pounding. The echo came from far off, but closer than before, a warning written in rhythm, ancient and certain. He stepped outside, eyes on the horizon. Dust lifted from the distance, spiraling upward in brown columns. Movement, riders. Illy spoke through gritted teeth. "They're common." Kaima stood beside him now, the wind whipping her hair into her face. Her jaw set firm, her eyes fierce. She wasn't afraid. Neither was her sister. They had seen too much to fear men anymore. Illy looked at them, both the hunted and the strong, and felt a strange calm wash over him. He'd spent years hiding from his past, running from every wrong turn. But today, at this dying ranch, with the world closing in from all sides, he'd finally found something worth standing for. He lifted his rifle, squinting toward the growing dust. "All right," he said under his breath. "If they want war, they'll find a man who's done runnin'." The wind howled, the drums beat louder. And on the horizon, the storm of men and vengeance began to take shape, a dark tide rolling toward Ashwood Ranch, where Mercy, for the first time in years, had decided to make its last stand. By the time the sun began to fall, Ashwood Ranch was breathing in the stillness before the storm. Every sound carried meaning now, the creak of wood, the sigh of the horses, the slow roll of thunder from the canyons beyond. Illy stood by the fence, staring at the red sky bleeding into the west. He could feel it, the weight of something unstoppable drawing near. Kaima and Nali were inside the barn, gathering what little they had. A flask of water, a broken knife, a thin wool blanket that had once belonged to Illy's late wife. They packed with the quiet grace of people who'd known loss far too long. Illy entered the barn, boots crunching over straw. He looked at the two sisters, one strong again, the other recovering faster than reason allowed, and shook his head slowly. "You could still make a run for it," he said. "Take the back trail by the creek. It'll hide your tracks for a mile or two." Kaima looked at him, eyes sharp with gratitude and defiance. "You come?" she asked. He hesitated. His gaze drifted over the broken tools, the faded saddle, the scarred table where his wife once read her Bible aloud every night. "This land's all I got," he muttered. "Ain't much, but it's mine." Nolly stepped forward, speaking softly in her tongue. Kaima translated with a faint tremor in her voice. She says, "No land belongs to man who has no peace inside." Illy exhaled slow, rubbing the back of his neck. "Your sister's got a way of hit in a man where it hurts." Kaima smiled faintly, then glanced toward the horizon where the sun had turned the sky the color of fire. "Men come soon," she whispered. Illy nodded. "Yeah, I hear him." He walked to the wall and lifted an old trunk. Inside were a few cartridges, a length of rope, and a revolver so worn its steel had gone dull with years. He checked the chambers, 3 bullets left. He holstered it slow, like a man shaking hands with his fate. "Listen," he said, turning toward them. "When it starts, you don't wait. You get to that creek and keep moving. Don't look back." Kaima's eyes burned with something between pride and sorrow. She shook her head. "No, we stay. You help us. We help you." He started to argue, but Nolly's voice cut through the air, strong, commanding, final. Kaima translated in a whisper. She says, "If death come, it find all of us together." Illy stared at them both for a long time. Then, finally, he nodded. "So be it." The wind picked up outside, carrying with it the faint sound of shouting, distant but clear. The kind of shouting men make when they're not afraid of killing. Illy grabbed the lantern, blew out the flame, and plunged the barn into dim orange dusk. He could see the dust now, rolling down the ridge like smoke from a slow fire. Kaima reached for the rifle, leaning by the door, but Illy stopped her. "That ain't for you," he said gently. "You save your strength. If I go down, you run. Promise me." She looked him dead in the eyes and said one word that chilled him more than silence. "No." He stared at her, and in that moment, he understood this wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was something older, heavier. A redemption neither of them had planned, written in the dust and blood of the frontier. The first drops of rain began to fall, dry thunder rain that smelled of iron and smoke. Illy turned toward the fading light, his hand resting on the rifle's worn grip. The storm was no longer far away. It was here. And as the sky split open with lightning, Illy Mercer whispered to the wind, "Then let it come." The rain came heavy and wild that night, slapping against the barn like angry hands. Illy sat by the door, eyes half closed, listening to the storm roll through the valley. Every flash of lightning painted the hills in white fire. Every rumble of thunder carried closer echoes, the sound of men on horseback, boots drumming the earth in rhythm with the rain. Inside, the 2 Apache sisters prayed, low voices, ancient words, the kind that rise and fall like wind through canyon stone. Illy didn't understand the language, but he felt its weight, a plea, a promise, a farewell. He reached for the bottle of water on the floor, took one last sip, then set it down beside the rifle. His hands trembled, not from fear but from memory. He remembered holding his wife's hand the night she died, whispering that he'd find a way to make peace with the world. He'd lied until tonight. The horses outside shifted, uneasy. A voice cut through the downpour, sharp, commanding. "Mercer, we know they're here. You hand them over and you live." Illy rose slow, boots dragging through mud. He opened the barn door a crack. Rain poured in like silver chains. Out there, shapes moved behind torches, 5 soldiers, maybe 6, faces hidden under dripping hats. One of them shouted again, "You're hidden savages, Mercer. The law won't forgive that." Illy stepped out, the lantern light spilling over his shoulders. "I'm hid in no one," he called. His voice was rough but steady, the sound of a man who'd already buried everything he loved. A gun cocked in reply. "Then you won't mind us tacking a look." Illy's jaw tightened. "Barn's empty. You walk in there, you do it over my grave." Silence. Only rain. Then a laugh, mean, cold. "All right, old man. Your grave it is." They spread out, circling through the storm. Illy could see the glint of rifles in the lightning. He fired once warning shot, high into the air, the sound echoing off the cliffs. The soldiers ducked, cursed, and fired back. Bullets split the boards behind him. Splinters cut his cheek. He dropped low, rolled behind the trough, and reloaded with shaking fingers. From inside the barn came the sound of a hymn, the sisters' voices weaving through thunder, not with fear but with calm. He fired again, this time lower a spark of light, a cry from the darkness. One man fell. The rest cursed louder, shooting blind into the storm. Then, through the chaos, Kaima stepped out, barefoot, hair soaked, eyes like black flame. She knelt beside the fallen horse by the fence, Illy's last mare, wounded earlier in the chase. Her hands pressed against its chest, whispering something in her tongue. Illy turned, shouting over the rain. "Get back inside." She didn't move. She just looked up at him, the wind tearing through her hair, and said softly, "Life must not die alone." For a moment, everything stopped: rain, thunder, even the war in his heart. He lowered the rifle, breath caught between rage and awe. The soldiers hesitated, watching the strange sight, an Apache woman kneeling in prayer over a dying horse. In that silence, something shifted. One soldier took a step back. Another lowered his gun, and then the sergeant broke it. "Shoot her," but before he could raise his weapon, Illy fired first. The sergeant dropped to his knees, torch falling into the mud. The flame hissed out, swallowed by the rain. When it was over, only 2 soldiers were left. They turned and fled into the dark, their shouts fading beyond the hills. Illy stood there, breathing hard, rifle hanging loose in his grip. Kaima rose from the mud, her hands red with the horse's blood, her eyes bright with tears. She walked toward him, holding out a small silver pendant round, etched with the mark of a hawk. She placed it in his hand and whispered, "For mercy." Illy stared at it at her, then closed his fingers around the pendant. He had no words left, only a weight in his chest, heavy, clean, and final. When the rain began to ease, he went back inside. The sisters sat near the lantern, silent, waiting. Illy placed the pendant on the table beside the Bible and said, "Guess I picked my side tonight." No one answered. Outside, the last of the thunder rolled away toward the mountains, leaving only the sound of dripping eaves and the faint cry of coyotes in the distance. Illy sat down, back against the wall, eyes half closed. He knew the soldiers would come again, more of them, angrier, but for now there was peace, fragile, fleeting, the kind a man earns only once in his life. And as the lantern flickered low, his wife's voice seemed to echo from the dark, "Mercy is the last proof of manhood." He smiled faintly, whispering to the night, "Then I reckon I just became a man again." The storm had passed, but it left behind a silence too deep to trust. Morning came, slow, pale light seeping through the torn roof, painting the barn in silver dust. Illy sat by the dying embers of the fire, hat low over his brow, the pendant glinting faintly in his hand. He turned it over and over, tracing the mark of the hawk with his thumb. The metal felt warm, as if it still carried the pulse of the one who'd given it. The sisters were awake, sitting side by side on the hay, wrapped in the old wool blanket. Kaima's gaze followed him quietly, her expression unreadable. Nali was whispering again, not a prayer this time, but something soft and rhythmic, like a story told to the dawn. Illy finally spoke, voice cracked and low. "That symbol," he said, holding the pendant toward Kaima. "I seen it before, years ago." Kaima lifted her head. "Where? On a flag?" Illy answered, eyes distant. "A treaty flag. My wife's brother was there, a soldier. He said the hawk stood for peace, an oath between your people and ours. A promise that didn't last." Kaima looked away, her jaw tightening. "Your people broke that promise." Illy nodded slowly. "Ain't here to defend him. I just thought maybe the man who gave this to you once, maybe he was one of the good ones." Kaima's eyes darkened, and for the first time she spoke with heat. "The man who gave this was our father, Chief Nahiko of the Hawk Valley. He carried that mark as his word. He died with your army's bullet in his chest while he tried to save a child." Her voice cracked, but she held his stare. Illy didn't look away. He couldn't. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sound was the wind pressing against the boards, whispering through the gaps like ghosts remembering. Finally, Illy said quietly, "My wife's brother, Lieutenant Avery Cross, was at that battle. He came home with a medal, said he'd done his duty. I never believed him. He drank himself to death 6 months later. Kept saying one thing before the end, the hawk was innocent." Kaima's breath caught. Nali turned sharply, eyes wide. her whisper breaking into a tremor of disbelief. Kaima translated, voice shaking. She says the name Avery Cross is cursed among our people. He killed our father. He signed the peace, then burned our camp. Illy's face went pale. His hand opened, the pendant falling onto the table with a dull, heavy sound. For a moment, he just stared at it, the metal glinting in the weak light. The hawk staring back like judgment carved in silver. He stood, stepped outside, and leaned against the fence. The land stretched endless and empty, the kind of emptiness that made a man face himself. He took off his hat and let the wind move through his hair, eyes burning against the light. For years he'd carried guilt without a name. Now it had one. Kaima followed him, silent at first. When she finally spoke, her voice was gentler than the look in her eyes. You carry his blood, Illy nodded. By marriage? I reckon that's close enough to count. Kaima studied him, her face unreadable. Then why save us? He didn't answer right away. His eyes wandered to the horizon, where the clouds were parting and the mountains glowed in the new sun. I reckon I didn't save you, he said finally. I saved what little was left of the man I wanted to be. For the first time since the night they met, Kaima smiled faint, sad but real. Maybe that is enough. Behind them, Nali was painting symbols on the barn wall with ashes from the fire circles and lines that shimmered in the dim light. Kaima explained softly, she draws the path between past and now, so that the spirits do not lose their way. Illy turned back toward the barn, eyes on the pendant still resting on the table. Seems like both our spirits been wandering too long, he murmured. Kaima nodded. Then we stopped running. He met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. A fragile trust, born in dust and fire. Neither friend nor enemy, just two broken souls finding a moment of stillness in a world that had none. But the silence didn't last. Somewhere in the distance, a single echo of a horn rose, faint but sharp, the sound of soldiers regrouping, or perhaps something worse. Illy's eyes narrowed. Sounds like the world just remembered we're still here. Kaima looked toward the hills. No, she whispered, not the soldiers. Her hand went to her heart. That is the call of our own. And just like that, the air seemed to change. The peace shattered into a quiet, waiting fear. The storm that had passed was not gone. It was only gathering strength. The storm clouds had drifted east, leaving behind a washed, clean sky. The land around Dry Creek glowed gold under the first light, the kind that makes even scars look like stories. Sam stepped out of the barn, hat low, rifle across his shoulder. The smell of smoke and earth lingered, reminders that the night had not been a dream. The Apache sisters stood by the corral, quiet and still. Morning light caught the bronze of their skin, the faint shimmer of the beads around their necks. They had not slept, neither had Sam. The night's battle had left its marks on wood, on flesh, and somewhere deeper. Your people will come, Sam said quietly, his voice rough as gravel. They'll want to finish what started. The elder sister met his gaze. They will not fight you again. They saw you stand when you could have run, in our tongue that earns peace. Sam looked away toward the rising sun. Peace, he muttered, haven't seen much of that round here. For a moment's silence. Only the soft nickering of horses. Then, from the ridge, a figure appeared, one of the Apache scouts. He rode down slow, no weapon drawn. The sisters tensed but didn't move. The rider stopped 10 paces from Sam and raised an open palm. The message was wordless but clear, respect. The war was over, at least for now. Sam nodded once, a tired half salute. Tell him this ranch is no enemy ground, he said. Just a place where hungry folks get fed if they don't mind a day's work. The scout gave a nod and rode off into the light. When he was gone, Sam turned back to the sisters. You can stay here if you like. Ain't much, but it's dry and the fences could use fixing. The younger sister smiled faintly. You saved our lives. We will help you fix your fences. Sam's lips twitched into something close to a grin. Guess that makes us partners then. The sun climbed higher, spilling over the valley warm, wide, and new. And as the dust lifted from the ground, Dry Creek breathed again. Not a place of war anymore. but a place reborn through fire and courage, where a poor rancher and two Apache sisters built something the West had nearly forgotten: trust. The wind carried it across the plains, whispering their names into legend. Weeks passed like wind over open grass. Dry Creek began to heal, fences rebuilt, the barn standing strong again, smoke rising from the chimney each dusk like a promise that life went on. Sam rode out every morning before dawn, checking cattle, mending lines, his mind quieter than it had been in years. The Apache sisters had settled into the rhythm of the land. The elder, Nita, worked alongside Sam with calm precision, her silence carrying the weight of centuries. The younger, Tala, brought laughter back to the place, soft, rare, but real. Her songs, sung in her people's tongue, floated across the fields as the sun fell behind the mesas. Yet beneath that peace, something uneasy stirred. One morning, as the three stood by the well drawing water, a sound echoed from far beyond the ridge, not thunder, not hooves. It was sharper, hollow, like a horn blown through metal. Sam froze. His eyes narrowed toward the horizon. "Riders?" Tala asked softly. Sam listened again. No. Wagons too heavy, too many. By noon, the dust cloud was visible, a caravan moving slow through the valley road. Wagons painted white with blue markings. Government seal, U.S. Cavalry supply line. Nita's face hardened. They come for land again. Sam said nothing. He remembered the last time those wagons came through: papers, orders, maps with lines that cut through every piece of dirt a man thought he owned. That evening, as the sun bled red over the canyon rim, Sam saddled his horse. "If they're setting up out there," he said, "we best know what kind of neighbors we're getting." Tala stepped forward. "You go alone, they'll take you for a scout. We'll come." Sam shook his head. "No, the army ain't got love for your people. Stay here, both of you. Keep the fire low tonight." Nita laid a hand on his arm. "You saved us once. Let us guard your home while you ride." Their eyes met, trust forged through fire and loss. Sam gave a short nod and mounted up. As he rode toward the canyon, the light dimmed to amber and purple. Coyotes sang in the distance. From the ridge, the glow of campfires flickered, and over them, the faint sound of men laughing. Sam's jaw tightened. "New neighbors," he muttered. "Let's see what kind of trouble you're bringing with you." He nudged the horse forward, disappearing into the canyon's shadow, where the whispers of the West waited to tell him what came next. Night wrapped the land in silence. The moon rose pale and thin, lighting the canyon walls like bones buried beneath time. Sam moved slow, keeping low among the rocks. Ahead, the camp came into view: 5 wagons, 6 horses tied, and a circle of soldiers drinking by the fire. Their voices carried, "General says this valley's prime for settlement. Orders are to clear out any squatters, ranchers, or natives both." One man said, tossing a twig into the flames. Sam's chest tightened. "Clear out," the words burned worse than the whiskey smell in the air. Another voice answered, rough and lazy. "What about the old ranch down yonder? Dry Creek, they call it. Heard there's Apache about." The first man laughed. "We'll smoke 'em out if they're there. Army don't take kindly to redskins living off government land." Sam's fingers curled around his rifle stock. He could have ended the talk with one pull of the trigger. But he knew better. One dead soldier would bring 20 more. He needed a plan, not a grave. He backed away, leading his horse down the trail under the cover of the wind. The ride home felt longer than it should have, the weight of what he'd heard pressing heavy against his heart. When he reached the ranch, the sisters were waiting by the fire. The light flickered over their faces, calm but alert. "They're not settlers," Sam said, voice low. "Army detail. They mean to take this valley." Nita's eyes darkened. "Again," Tala whispered. "How long do we have? 2 days, maybe 3. They'll move at first light once their orders come through." The 3 sat in silence. The crackle of the fire was the only sound between them. Finally, Nita stood and walked to the barn door, looking out toward the dark hills. "Our people once fought every storm," she said quietly, Then the storm changed its face and wore a uniform. Sam stared into the fire. "If they want this land, they'll have to take it from me. I built it with these hands. Ain't giving it up again." Tala stepped closer. "You'll fight." He nodded. "Not the way they expect. There's a pass east of the canyon narrow as a snake's spine. We'll make our stand there if it comes to it, by time." Nita turned to him, her gaze steady. "We'll stand with you. The spirits of this land know us still." The wind outside rose, carrying dust and the far-off echo of hooves. Sam looked toward the sound, then back at the sisters. "Then we best start getting ready," he said. "The West ain't done testing us yet." And as the fire burned low, 3 shadows moved across the dry ground, a rancher and 2 Apache sisters, bound by fate and the dust of a land that never gave without a fight. Dawn broke cold and mean, the kind of light that cuts across the land like a knife, turning every shadow into warning. Dry Creek lay still, but the air carried a tension, the kind that hums before a storm of men. Sam was already outside, sleeves rolled up, rope tied across the fence posts. The sisters worked beside him, Nita laying sharpened stakes along the trail, Tala filling barrels with water and dusting the old rifles Sam had kept from the war. No one spoke much. They all knew what was coming. By mid-morning, the first plume of dust appeared beyond the ridge. Sam squinted through the sunlight, counting figures on horseback, soldiers, maybe a dozen, leading wagons behind. The flag fluttered faintly over the lead rider. "U.S. Cavalry. Guess they didn't waste time," Sam muttered, setting his rifle against the post. Tala looked up from the trough. "We can still leave." Sam shook his head. "Ain't runnin' from men who don't own what they claim." Nita's eyes followed the riders in the distance. "Then the land will choose who stays." As the soldiers drew closer, Sam wiped the sweat from his brow and stood by the gate. The 2 sisters stayed behind the corral fence, silent as the wind. The lead soldier dismounted, boots crunching on the dry dirt. His coat was clean, his face sharp. A man who thought order came from paper and ink, not sweat and dust. "You the owner here?" he asked. Sam nodded. "Far as sweat and years can make a man one." The soldier unfolded a document, holding it up like a weapon. "By order of the U.S. Army and the Territorial Office, this land is to be reclaimed for settlement and survey. You've got 48 hours to vacate." Sam took the paper, glanced at it, then folded it once slow and stuffed it into his vest pocket. "Reckon I just claimed 48 hours to think on it." The soldier's eyes hardened. "That's not a suggestion, rancher." Sam looked past him, over the men sitting tall on their horses, rifles slung across their laps. Then back at the officer. "Ain't no suggestion either." The silence between them stretched long. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Finally, the officer swung back into his saddle. "You've been warned. At sunrise on the 3rd day we return, and if you're still here—" Sam cut him off. "Then you'll be trespassing." The officer spurred his horse and turned, leading his men back down the ridge. Dust rose behind them like smoke. When they disappeared over the horizon, Tala came out from behind the fence, her face pale. "They'll come back, Sam, you know they will." He nodded, eyes fixed on the fading dust. "Yeah, but when they do, this land'll remember who stood on it first." Nita stepped beside him. "Then we'll draw the line not with ink, but with courage." Sam looked at her and smiled faintly, the kind of smile worn by men who already know the cost. "Then let's draw it deep," he said, "so the dust remembers." The sun fell heavy that evening, blood, red and wide across the plains. Dry Creek shimmered beneath its glow, quiet, waiting. Every fence post, every window frame, every grain of dust seemed to hold its breath. Inside the barn, Sam oiled the rifle with steady hands. The metal gleamed in the lamplight. Nearby, Nita stacked spare cartridges in neat rows, her movements calm, deliberate. Tala sat cross-legged by the doorway, whispering in her native tongue old words, prayers older than the ranch itself. When the wind rose, it carried the faint scent of sage and smoke. Nita paused, lifted her head. "They are close," she said. Sam walked to the barn door, peering into the dying light. Far off, on the rim of the valley, torches flickered like fireflies. "Cavalry don't travel with torches," he muttered. "That's more than soldiers. Could be settlers tagging along for a claim." Tala stood, gripping her bow. "They come for the land." Sam nodded. "Then the land'll answer." He turned to the sisters. "You two stay low when it starts. I'll take the ridge, draw them off if I can." Nita shook her head firmly. "No, Sam, you ride alone. They'll cut you down before you reach cover. We know this soil. We'll fight beside you." He met her gaze, and for a heartbeat words failed him. There was no fear in her eyes, only fire. The same fire that had carried her people through centuries of loss. "All right," he said quietly. "Then we fight together." They took their positions as the night deepened. Sam lay behind a fallen log overlooking the narrow trail. Nita crouched among the brush near the well. Tala perched on the barn roof, bow ready, her silhouette barely visible against the stars. The first riders came just past midnight, the rhythmic clop of hooves breaking the silence. Then came the wagons, creaking under their own weight. The officer's voice carried through the darkness. "Surround the place. No one leaves. Burn it if you have to." Sam's jaw clenched. He raised the rifle, breathed once, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the valley. One soldier dropped from his horse. Chaos followed, shouting, gunfire, the sharp twang of Tala's arrows slicing the air. Flames from a lantern burst across a wagon's tarp, lighting the ridge like daylight. "Hold your ground," Sam shouted. "Don't let him through." The sisters fought like the land itself, fierce and unyielding. Nita moved with the calm of a storm's eye, firing from the shadows. Tala's arrows flew swift and true, each one a whisper of vengeance. For every yard the cavalry advanced, the ground seemed to fight back, traps, smoke, and grit turning the valley into a wall of resistance. But as the night wore on, the torches kept coming, more riders. More gunfire. Sam ducked behind the log as a bullet tore through his hat. He reloaded, his heart pounding like thunder. "Fall back to the barn," he shouted. "We make our stand there." Through the smoke and fire, the three figures retreated toward the heart of Dry Creek, the ranch that had become their home, their line in the dust, and the place where the West itself would decide who had the right to stand beneath its sky. The storm broke with the first light of dawn. The night's fire had burned itself into embers, smoke drifting low across the valley like the breath of something old and tired. The barn stood scarred but unbroken, its walls blackened, its roof trembling in the morning wind. Sam Mercer stood in the doorway, rifle heavy in his hands, eyes fixed on the ridge. The air was still, but his pulse wasn't. He could feel it, the silence before the final voice. Then came the sound. Distant at first, the faint creak of leather, the soft rhythm of hooves over ash. Out of the gray, riders appeared, not the soldiers this time. These men moved differently, slower, prouder, as if each carried the weight of 1,000 unburied names. Apache warriors, dozens of them, then hundreds. Their horses snorted steam into the cold air, their spears and rifles glinting in the pale light. And at their center rode a man draped in a black, red blanket, a silver medallion catching the dawn. His face was carved from stone, fierce, unreadable. Nita stepped out beside Sam, her hair tangled, her skin streaked with soot, her eyes locked on the man at the center. "It's him," she whispered, "our brother." Tala, limping but alive, joined them. "Chief Gray Hawk now," she said softly. "He leads what's left of our people." The warriors stopped just beyond the burned corral. 100 faces stared at the ranch, some with anger, some with sorrow. The chief dismounted slowly, his moccasins sinking into the wet dirt. Sam lowered his rifle, feeling the weight of the moment press against his chest. "So this is it," he murmured, "the storm after the storm." Gray Hawk's gaze found Nita first, then Tala, then the man standing between them. His voice carried like thunder wrapped in calm. "You sheltered my sisters," he said, "and you shed blood on Apache soil. Sam took a step forward. I did what was right. Not for reward, not for war, for mercy. The chief's eyes narrowed. Mercy, he repeated, as though tasting the word. My father spoke that word before soldiers cut him down under a white flag. He reached into his cloak and pulled out something small, a worn metal pendant, smeared with dirt and age. Sam froze. He knew it instantly. The same pendant Nita had given him days ago. The same symbol he had once seen in a faded letter signed by his wife's brother, Captain Elijah Grant, years before the massacre. The truth came like lightning. His wife's bloodline and these sisters' pain had been tied together long before this dawn. Sam's voice dropped low. That pendant belonged to my wife's brother. He was part of the patrol that slaughtered my father. Gray Hawk finished, voice sharp as flint. And now his kin stands before me, defending what was stolen. The words cut deep. Sam didn't move. He didn't raise his gun. Then take my life if it'll balance what was done. But know this, your sisters would have died here if I hadn't opened that door. The chief studied him for a long moment, his jaw tight, his breath slow. Behind him, warriors shifted, restless. One raised his rifle, but the chief lifted a hand, a command for silence. Nita stepped forward, trembling. Brother, listen, she said in Apache. This man fought for us, bled for us. His soul carries no guilt for our father's death. Gray Hawk's eyes softened just enough to meet hers, and yet, he said, our ancestors demand balance. The land remembers. The wind rose, then soft, ghostly, carrying the smell of rain and gunpowder. Sam felt the weight of it in his bones, the same way a man feels the noose tighten before the drop. He laid the rifle on the ground. If my death gives you peace, he said quietly, then I'll walk to it without a word. The chief looked at him for a long while. The air seemed to hold still, not a sound, not a bird, not even the horses moved. Then, in a voice rough with history, he said, Peace never comes from another man's death. He turned slightly toward the horizon, where smoke still rose from the burned wagons. It comes when men stop making death their proof of honor. For the first time, Sam saw it, the grief behind the warrior's eyes, the same pain that had followed him since his wife's passing. Two men, both broken by ghosts that refused to stay buried. Gray Hawk raised his hand again, signaling the warriors to lower their weapons. The storm had not ended, but something inside it had shifted from vengeance to something quieter, something close to truth. But the peace was fragile, and the dawn, though beautiful, was still painted in fire. The wind turned cold, sweeping through the charred fences of Dry Creek. It carried the smell of smoke, blood, and wet earth. The silence between the two sides hung heavy, an unfinished prayer caught between vengeance and forgiveness. Sam stood unarmed in the open field. His boots sank into the soft mud, his shirt torn, his breath misting in the pale light. Behind him, the barn leaned against the horizon like an old man refusing to fall. Nita and Tala stood a few paces behind, their eyes fixed on their brother chief Gray Hawk, who now faced the rancher that had saved what remained of his blood. Gray Hawk's gaze drifted from his sisters to the wounded man before him. He looked past the years, past the grief. The rifle at his side gleamed with dew. For a long time he said nothing. Then his voice came, low and deliberate. You should have let them die, he said. It would have been simpler. The dead don't suffer. Sam didn't flinch. The living do, and I've done my share. The chief studied him, a man half, broken by time, yet still standing. You think mercy washes away what your kind has done? No, Sam answered softly. Mercy doesn't wash it away. It just keeps us from drowning in it. The chief's expression flickered a spark of something that wasn't anger, but memory. A boy beside his father's grave. The sound of drums that no longer beat. The promise that vengeance would heal a wound that mercy never could. And then, from beyond the ridge, came a sound none of them expected, the shrill echo of bugles. Nita's face went pale, the soldiers. Out of the rising light came the blue coats riders, rifles raised, galloping hard. The smoke of their approach rolled like thunderclouds. They had come back to finish what they started. Sam spun, eyes narrowing. Get to cover. Bullets split the dawn. The Apache warriors scattered to the rocks, returning fire. Horses screamed, arrows hissed through the air. The ground erupted in a storm of noise and dust. Sam grabbed his rifle, diving behind a wagon. Gray Hawk shouted orders, his warriors closing ranks. In that chaos, the old enemies fought side by side, rancher and Apache, bound not by peace, but survival. A soldier's shot grazed Sam's shoulder. He gritted his teeth, firing back. Beside him, Tala loosed her arrows, each one finding a mark. Nita knelt by the wounded, her hands slick with blood and tears. Then came the sound that silenced everything, the cry of a woman. Tala had fallen. A bullet struck her in the chest, the pendant she once wore glinting as it shattered into the mud. Nita screamed her name, running through the gunfire, falling to her knees beside her sister. Tala, stay with me, her breath came shallow. Her eyes searched for Sam, for Gray Hawk, for the light breaking behind them. The storm's gone, she whispered weakly. Let it go, brother, let it go. And with that, the last warmth of night left her face. Gray Hawk froze, the world narrowed to that single sight. His hands trembled. His sister's blood stained his palms, mixing with the dirt of their homeland. Sam stood nearby, his rifle lowered. I'm sorry, he said quietly. It was a soldier's stray shot. Gray Hawk didn't answer. He rose slowly, his face like carved stone, eyes filled not with fury but hollow silence. He turned toward the remaining soldiers. For a moment, Sam thought he'd raise his rifle again, call for another round of death. Instead, the chief lifted his arm, signaling his warriors to cease fire. Enough, he said hoarsely, no more blood for blood. The soldiers hesitated, uncertain, their commander shouting orders that no longer reached his men. The field went still again, only the wind moved, carrying with it the smoke, the cries, and the truth that every man left alive would carry for the rest of his days. Gray Hawk knelt beside his fallen sister, pressing her pendant now cracked into Sam's hand. Bury her where the land still breathes, he said, and remember what mercy costs. Sam nodded. No words could fit in the space she left behind. As the sun climbed higher, the warriors gathered their wounded and drifted back into the desert, not defeated, but done. The soldiers turned their horses and rode west, leaving the dead where they fell. When the dust finally settled, only Sam, Nita, and the silence remained. He looked at the field, at the graves waiting to be dug, and felt the weight of it all pressing down. The war was over, but the land would remember. He turned to Nita, her face streaked with tears, and whispered, "We'll give her the morning, the one she never got to see." And as the first true light of dawn broke across Dry Creek, the rancher and the surviving sister began to dig, not out of defeat, but to give peace a place to rest. The sun climbed slow that morning, red and wide like an open wound. It bled across the valley, washing the land in a dull amber light. The air was still, heavy with the smell of smoke and rain, soaked ash. Nothing moved but the carrion birds circling high above the ridge, silent witnesses to the end of vengeance. Sam Mercer stood by the grave he'd carved with his own hands. The shovel leaned beside him, its handle dark with sweat and soil. His palms were raw, his body trembling with exhaustion, but he didn't stop. Each stroke of the blade bit deep into the wet earth, slow, steady, deliberate. Nita knelt nearby, holding the broken pendant between her fingers. The silver had cracked down the middle where the bullet had struck it, the etching of her father's old symbol barely visible now. She traced it gently, her voice low, almost prayerful. Her spirit will find the mountain, she whispered. She will rest where our ancestors wait. Sam paused, his breath heavy. He looked at her, at the way she spoke to the wind, as if it could carry her words upward. He wanted to speak, but the words caught in his throat. There were no words for something this wide, this final. He laid down the shovel and stepped back. The grave was ready, a narrow wound in the land, lined with wild sage and soft grass Nita had gathered from the creek bed. Together, they lifted Tala's body, wrapped in the blanket she had once used as shelter from the storm. The fabric was torn and soot, stained, but it still carried the faint scent of cedar and smoke, the scent of life once lived, fierce and fleeting. They laid her gently into the earth. Nita knelt beside her sister's body, her hair falling over her face. "You were the song in our silence," she whispered in Apache, "the fire that did not fade. May the wind carry you where the rivers never dry." Her voice broke. Sam lowered his hat, standing in silence. He had buried many things on that land: cattle, hopes, a wife, but never something that carried this kind of stillness. It wasn't grief alone. It was recognition. That all the wars, all the debts, all the blood ended the same way. With two hands pressing the dirt closed over a name that would never be called again. He picked up the shovel once more, pressing the first mound of earth gently over Tala's blanket. The sound was soft, almost tender. Nita closed her eyes, listening as if each fall of soil was a heartbeat fading into memory. When it was done, they marked the grave with two crosses, one of cedar, one of bone. Between them hung the broken pendant, glinting faintly in the sun. The wind rose again, brushing the grass flat around the mound. Sam spoke then, his voice rough, quiet. "I buried my wife right here, 12 years ago. She used to say the land doesn't take what it can't forgive. Maybe she was right." Nita looked up at him, her eyes swollen from tears. "Then this land will remember her kindly." He nodded, but his gaze drifted to the horizon where the Apache war party had disappeared hours before. Smoke still lingered in the distance, faint but stubborn. He wondered if Grey Hawk would ever return, or if this was their final piece. "Your brother," he said finally. "You think he'll forgive?" Nita stood, dusting her hands. "No, but he'll understand, and sometimes that's all forgiveness is, understanding what pain costs." They stood side by side as the sun reached its peak. The shadows of the two crosses stretched long across the prairie. The air shimmered with heat, and the world seemed to hold its breath, caught between mourning and renewal. Down by the creek, the horses drank silently. The sound of the water felt like the first calm heartbeat of a world learning to breathe again. Nita turned toward the ranch house, or what was left of it. The roof sagged, walls blackened, doors hanging loose. But it still stood. So did they. She looked at Sam. "What will you do now?" He wiped the dirt from his hands, eyes narrowing against the glare of the sun. "Same thing I've always done. Try to live." Nita nodded. "Then I'll stay. Not as debt, not as kin owed, but because this place still breathes." Sam didn't answer. He just looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time in years, there was something other than sorrow in his eyes. Hope, faint as dust on the horizon, the red sun burned higher, washing the grave in light. The land was still wounded, but it was alive, and for the first time since the war began, Dry Creek felt like it could belong to both of them. The next morning broke without sound. No birds sang, no wind stirred through the cottonwoods by the creek. It was the kind of quiet that followed storms, the kind where the land seemed to listen to itself, trying to remember how peace was supposed to sound. Sam Mercer stepped out onto the porch, his boots sinking into the damp dust. The world still smelled of gunpowder and rain. His hands were raw and blistered from the digging, but the ache inside him was quieter now. Not gone, never gone, but settled, like dust after a long ride. Across the yard, Nita was tending to the horses. She moved slow, with that same calm purpose that Tala once carried, her voice low as she spoke to the animals, her hand gentle on their necks. The horses trusted her already, so did the land. Sam leaned against the porch post, watching her. It struck him how much had changed in so little time. A week ago, she had been a stranger he'd found half starved on the trail. Now, she was part of everything that still breathed on his ranch. He caught sight of the two crosses on the hill, one his wife's, one Tala's, their shadows stretching side by side in the early light. The wind carried faint echoes of Nita's song from the burial, that haunting melody that clung to the earth long after her voice had stopped. Sam spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Seems the dead keep me better company than the living." Nita looked up from the corral. Then maybe it's time to change that. She walked toward him, wiping her hands on her skirt, a hint of dust rising behind her boots. You've given enough to ghosts, she said. This land's asking for the living now. Sam managed a weak smile. You sound like her. I should, Nita said. She believed in you when no one else did. Said you had the kind of heart that could outlast bullets. He looked down, jaw tightening. She said that before I buried her. Nita stepped closer. No, she said that because she knew you'd still be standing after. Silence fell again, but it wasn't heavy this time. The kind of silence that carried understanding, not grief. From the ridge came the faint call of a hawk, one long, piercing cry that faded into the sky. Nita turned toward it, shading her eyes. That's his sign, she murmured. Gray hawk's gone. He won't come back here. Sam nodded slowly. Then the war's done. Nita looked toward the horizon where the sun painted the plains gold. No, she said softly. Wars don't end. They just change hands. But maybe this one. She paused, brushing her braid over her shoulder. Maybe this one can rest. They stood there for a long while, watching the light creep across the prairie. Sam could feel the pulse of the earth beneath his boots, faint, steady, alive. Finally he said, You can stay here, work the land. It ain't much, but it's honest. Nita smiled faintly. I wasn't asking. I already decided. That drew the first real laugh from Sam in months, a rough, low sound that surprised him. You Apaches, he said, shaking his head. You got a way of taking what you want. Her eyes softened. Only what the world forgets to keep. They walked together toward the barn. The sun rose higher, spilling light through the cracks in the wood. Inside, dust motes danced like spirits in the air, restless, beautiful, and free. Sam reached for the saddle, running his hand over the worn leather. Reckon I'll ride into town tomorrow, he said. Tell the sheriff what happened. Tell him it's done. Nita's voice grew quiet. And if they don't believe you, he shrugged, then they'll ride out here and see what the land already knows. Outside, the sky stretched wide and endless, the kind of sky that could make a man believe in second chances. Nita turned toward the graves one last time. The wind stirred the sage planted there, carrying the faintest scent of cedar across the yard. She's free, she said, but we ain't done yet. There's still fences to mend, water to find, and winter coming. Sam smiled at that, a real smile this time, the kind that belonged to the living. Then let's get to work. As they walked back toward the fields, the camera of life, if there had been one, would have pulled back slowly, rising over the hills, catching the shimmer of the two crosses on the ridge. The ranch below, scarred but alive. The land reborn beneath the red sun, and two souls bound not by blood or vengeance anymore, but by survival. The debt of the living had been paid, and the prairie, at last, was quiet. 3 months passed since the last gunfire echoed through Dry Creek. The grass had grown tall again, the wounds in the earth softened by rain. But the silence that settled over the ranch wasn't peace, it was waiting. Sam Mercer rode the fence line at dawn, his coat heavy with dust, his rifle across the saddle horn. Every morning he made the same circuit, checking posts, scanning horizons, listening. Not because he expected trouble, but because a man who's fought for his land never truly stops guarding it. He reached the north ridge and pulled the reins. The plains stretched wide and endless before him, brown and gold under a silver sky, but today something felt off. A faint trail of dust moved along the far road, low and slow, like a whisper against the horizon. He watched it for a long minute before muttering, "Riders." Back at the ranch, Nita was by the creek, washing clothes in the cold current. The sound of hooves reached her before Sam's voice did. She looked up, eyes narrowing. Company, maybe, Sam said as he dismounted. Could be drifters, could be scouts. She wiped her hands on her skirt, her voice steady. "You think it's the army again?" Sam shook his head. "No, army don't ride that quiet. These look like men with reason to hide." Nita's expression hardened. "Then we should be ready." Sam nodded, pulling open the barn door. Inside hung the old rifle, the one with the broken stock he'd used the night of the fire. He ran his hand over the wood, rough, scarred, but solid. Like everything that survived Dry Creek, You know, Nita said we could leave, head west. There's talk of new land past the mountains, clean rivers, no soldiers, no fences. Sam gave a short laugh. And leave this place, after what it cost us. He shook his head. No, Nita, we made this ground ours. I won't let ghosts or strangers take it again. She studied him quietly, then said, You sound like her. Sam looked toward the ridge where Tala's grave rested. Maybe I'm finally learning what she meant. By afternoon, the riders came closer, 4 of them, dark figures against the pale dust. Sam and Nita watched from the porch, rifles ready but low. When the first man reached the gate, he lifted his hand, no gun drawn, just a slow wave of peace. Mercer, he called out. Name's Clayton Ward. We're looking for a man used to fighting. Got word you held off a company right here in Dry Creek. Sam stayed still, eyes narrowed. Depends who's asking. Ward grinned under his hat. We ain't lawmen. We're heading south. Gold route's been raided. Folks need guarding. You'd get paid fair, food, land after the run. Sam didn't answer right away. He felt Nita's eyes on him. She said quietly, Another war, he sighed. No, just another man's fight wearing a different name. Ward tipped his hat. Think on it, Mercer. Ain't much left for honest men to do but pick a side and ride. When they rode off, their dust lingered long after they were gone, swirling slow, hanging in the still air like memory. Nita turned to him. You going? Sam stared at the fading trail. Don't know yet. But trouble's riding these roads again, Nita, and the dust doesn't move unless something's coming. She looked toward the west, where the sun began to dip low. Then maybe it's time we go meet it halfway. The wind picked up across the plain, carrying the dry whisper of the earth, the same whisper that had followed Sam since the day he first came to Dry Creek. It spoke of endings, of beginnings, and of the dust that always returns. That night, Sam saddled his horse again, not for war, not for revenge, but because some men are bound to the road, and the land never lets them rest too long. The storm that had been quiet all season was beginning to rise again, and this time it wasn't just the wind. The night was colder than it had been in weeks. The moon hung low and copper-colored, its light spilling across the valley like a ghost's lantern. Sam Mercer stood beside his horse, tightening the saddle straps, every movement slow, deliberate. Nita stood by the barn door, arms folded, watching him. You've already made up your mind, she said quietly. Sam didn't look up. Maybe I have. She walked closer, the gravel crunching beneath her boots. You think the land'll forgive you for leaving? He smiled faintly. Land don't forgive, Nita. It just waits. He turned then, meeting her eyes. Clayton Ward's right about one thing. Men like me don't stay still long. We fight, we build, we lose, and then we ride again. That's the only peace we get. Nita's voice softened. And what about this place? You fought for it. Tala died for it. I know, he said. His hand brushed the wood post beside him, the same post they'd rebuilt after the fire. But I can't spend the rest of my life staring at graves. If I stay, I'll become one. She looked down, then said, You could take me with you. Sam hesitated. You sure you'd want to? Ain't no promises on the road, just dust, bad coffee, and men who lie for gold. Nita smiled faintly. I've seen worse. Besides, you'll need someone to keep you alive. For the first time that night, Sam laughed, not the hollow kind, but real. You're something else, Nita. Guess I learned from the best. They packed light, a rifle, a canteen, a blanket, and 2 hearts that carried more weight than their saddlebags. Before leaving, Sam walked up the hill one last time. The graves lay quiet under the moonlight, 2 crosses carved by his own hand, one older, one new. He knelt, hat in hand. Guess I'm ridden again. He said softly, Don't know where this road ends, but I'll carry you both with me. The wind rose, brushing through the sage. A whisper moved through the air, faint, familiar, like Tala's voice on the breeze. Ride, Sam. The land's not done with you yet. He stood, dusted his knees, and turned toward the valley. When he mounted his horse, Nita was already waiting, her braid tied high, her eyes steady. Together, they rode out of the yard. Behind them, the ranch glowed faintly under the starlight, fences standing tall, the barn whole again, the well full. It no longer looked like a battlefield. It looked like a beginning someone else might one day find. They crossed the creek, water glinting like molten silver, and rode into the open plains. The wind met them head on, fierce and cold, carrying the scent of rain and faraway smoke. "Where to?" Nita asked. Sam looked west, where the sky was split between night and dawn. "Where the dust takes us," he said, "always does." The horses quickened their pace, hooves striking rhythm against the earth. Each beat echoed like a promise, steady, unbroken. As the horizon swallowed them whole, the first light of morning began to bloom. The land stretched wide and endless, empty yet alive, waiting for new stories, new scars, new names to carve into its soil. Behind them, Dry Creek faded into memory. Ahead of them, the world was wide open, and for the first time in a long time, Sam Mercer didn't feel haunted by the past. He felt pulled by the future, by the road, the wind, and the promise that somewhere out there, beyond the dust, a man could finally be free.